showed the country trying to figure out what public health was supposed to be. A surprising number of things that came up during the original yellow fever epidemic are plaguing us today because they're probably hardwired into the challenge of America, a huge country, taking care of itself in an epidemic situation. And the doctors of the day, while they were all fighting with each other, and I will say that doctors in Philadelphia often fought with each other about almost everything, they behaved. Those who stayed in town behaved very badly among each other, but they were all doing heroic work. They did not know if the disease was contagious, so they believed they were taking their own lives in their hands by staying and treating patients. Many of the doctors who left, their places were taken by members of the African American clergy who had been friendly with Rush. He was helping them build the first free black church just as the epidemic unfolded. And so the treatment in Philadelphia was done by physicians and by people who were referred to as the day as black nurses, who were members of the African American clergy and their parishioners, who went around and administered treatments and also were involved in making sure that the dead were properly buried. That's all. You're all muted now, so I can't hear a word anybody's saying. Does anybody have a question?
They might have some questions, and sometimes as you're speaking, they're feverishly writing as well. So sometimes it might take a moment or two where there's an awkward silence.
Go ahead. Okay.
Can you get the yellow fever today?
Yes, yellow fever is still exists. It's mostly a tropical disease, and interestingly, while there was endless debate during the time about what the best treatment was for it, we really don't have a great treatment for it today. Most people who get it, they either survive it or a certain percentage of people die from it. It's one of the viruses that is not easily to treat even today. But it's mostly a tropical disease. And the belief is that the reason it came to Philadelphia was that it probably came on a boat from the tropics, that both people on the boat and bugs that were on the boat that flew into the city spread it, mosquitoes.
What kind of treatments did they administer in the 1700s?
Well, mostly things you wouldn't do. So the lighter treatments were more what we'd think of as homeopathic, like drinking lots of water, making your diet more mild, rest, separating yourself from other people. In yellow fever, they thought it was contagious person to person, so the people who had it were supposed to be, isolated, things we're hearing about today. Wine was a treatment. There was a Peruvian bark that people used ground up as a treatment. And then more extreme treatments had to do with purging, so they gave you things that made you throw up or have diarrhea with the idea that would get bad things out of your system. And then there was bloodletting was the most extreme, where they would take blood out of your arm right here, the same place we give blood. And the idea being, there's lots of different theories about why bloodletting worked. There's lots of theories about how all these things worked, and there wasn't so much medical knowledge. But that's sort of the breadth of treatment. And what happened during yellow fever is that Benjamin Rush and the other remaining doctors all tried the lightest treatments first. People were dying right and left. Some doctors maintained that lighter treatment because they felt that either nature would fix these people or they would die. There's nothing else you could do. Benjamin Rush believed much more in aggressive treatment, as did some other doctors, and they gave more aggressive treatments. And so that was really, but those are the breadth of what was available to them. There weren't a lot of treatments. Besides, just like resting, cold compresses, things like that. There wasn't a lot else.
Why was the yellow fever called the yellow fever?
Because people's skin and especially their eyes turned yellow. Keep in mind, there were no tests back then to make sure that you had, just like right now, people don't know who has the coronavirus and who has the flu. Back then, there were no tests to know like what yellow fever was separately from anything else that people were getting in the late summer and early fall when people get sick. But when people's eyes turned yellow and their skin turned yellow, And then one of the other hallmarks of it was a really horrible black vomit that didn't look like any other vomit that people had seen. Those were the main things that allowed people to diagnose yellow fever.
Is the yellow fever common to get?
No, I mean, it's something to be afraid of in tropical places like malaria. But it also runs, as our coronavirus does, in epidemics, whereas malaria people get all the time. So there are some years in the past when yellow fever's been really bad, other years where it doesn't happen at all. And but it's not like the biggest thing we worry about today.
Do you know what animals transmit yellow fever?
It is believed to only be transmitted by mosquitoes because mosquitoes take the blood of somebody who has it and then bite you and put that in your blood. There's no other transmission by any other animals that we know of. And it's not transmitted in the air.
In what ways is the yellow fever epidemic similar to the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, I think, one, because it's so hard to make an organized response that everybody's on the same page with. I mean, public health and American freedom are hard things to balance. The anger among different people that their approach is the right approach and that everybody else is wrong. Fear. Fear is, when you have an epidemic, fear is a huge thing. And America was a big country then, even though it was only the East Coast. Obviously now it's much bigger. But when that many people are afraid, somebody mute your mic, please. When that many people are afraid, Chloe, there you go. You have that as well. So the politics of it are similar. The way that public health officials and public officials are arguing about it. The media making it all seem scarier. I mean, this is the beginning of Philadelphia in the early 1790s was the first time that America had many daily newspapers because the country, we just signed the Constitution. The country was sort of getting more organized. So you had a big media pumping out people's fears about all this too. Also, interestingly, there's competition between the different cities that could get yellow fever. So people in New York and in Baltimore were very happy to make it look like people in Philadelphia were having it worse because they were competing against each other to be the dominant port. Philadelphia, remember, was the biggest city in the country at this time and the U.S. capital. But New York was rising and becoming bigger. So, just the same kind of stuff, a lot of fear and loathing, people not being as nice to each other as they should be. And the worry, but keep in mind, for all the figures you're seeing now, we're talking about 10% of the total population of Philadelphia dying in 3 months. And while we don't know for sure how many people had left Philadelphia, if the percentage of people who still lived in Philadelphia who died, I'm sure the percentage was probably more like 15 or 20% because so many people left. That's a death rate that's so far beyond what we are dealing with coronavirus, but still bad.
What are some of the symptoms to the yellow fever?
I just told you. They are typical fever symptoms. Fever, high fever, shaking, and then again the yellow skin and the vomiting and pain. But they're just enhanced viral symptoms that just kept getting worse and worse. People died within days of getting this.
What was the point of drawing blood?
Well, I guess it's hard to understand now why people would do this. Keep in mind that at this time, the only part of the body that people could see into and in any way control was the blood. Without you being dead. So there's no x-rays, there was no, there was some minor surgery, but so a lot of things were taken care of by bloodletting because the pulse was something you could feel. And the belief was that this would, one, that if you lowered the volume of blood, if there were bad things in the blood, it would make you less sick. There was also an idea about inflammation, that if the blood pulse was lowered, that would be better. But, it's based on, as is true of many medical treatments over even into the 20th and 21st centuries, limited scientific knowledge and, just being wrong. But, bloodletting was originally, I don't know if you ever learned about this, but in the way, way, way past, way before Benjamin Rush, there was something called the humors. And there was the belief that there were 4 essential liquids in the body. And bile, blood, I forget what the other 2 were. And so changing them would be something you could do something about. So that's how bloodletting started. In Rush's time, they had a different idea about what bloodletting did. But it was the same treatment. Again, it was just that you made a little cut right in the crook of your elbow. You put a bowl underneath your elbow, and then you gathered whatever number of ounces the doctor prescribed. This wasn't always done by doctors. It was a barber could do it. So it was a medical treatment that was outsourced. Don't try it at home today.
Do you think the coronavirus would be easier to control if it were during Benjamin Rush's time? Would less people die in Philadelphia at the time of the coronavirus instead of?
Do I think it would be easy? Ask the question again.
If it was the coronavirus in Benjamin Rush's time instead of the yellow fever, would it be easier for them to control?
Oh, sure, because the coronavirus, even the cases where people die, their respiratory distress unfolds over a somewhat longer time. Yellow fever was, for the people who had it really hardcore, was more like Ebola. You got it really fast, and your body was depleted really fast, and you were throwing up your innards really fast, and you died. Coronavirus is very serious, but people are dying from respiratory distress, I think, mostly over a longer period of time. I think Benjamin Rush would have been really happy if coronavirus had come to Philadelphia in 1793 and not the yellow fever.
Is there any other way to transmit yellow fever instead of mosquitoes?
Not that we know of. It's transmitted in places that have outbreaks by mosquitoes, because it's blood-to-blood transmission. So it would be, I guess, not dissimilar to the way AIDS was transmitted. But one of the challenges is in any epidemic, how quickly can you figure out how is it transmitted and try to stop that? And in Philadelphia, they had this huge argument about whether the fever could be transmitted person to person, which was a technical problem just for doctors, but it was also a global problem because basically, if people thought this was coming from the environment of Philadelphia and not from transmission between people, then it was a criticism of Philadelphia. So there was a fear that there needed to be some larger public health intervention to do this because they really did not know. But there was not any. You couldn't breathe on somebody and give yellow fever to them. But I think we are still. We have some rudimentary understanding of how coronavirus moves, but I don't think it's perfect, and I think it'll take a while.
Is there a cure to the yellow fever?
Is there what?
A cure right now?
A cure? No. Yellow fever. When people get yellow fever, they are treated, with liquids, with rest, with hydration, with antibiotics. But they either fight back and beat it, or they don't.
What do people do to prevent themselves from getting the yellow fever?
There was a lot of belief at this time that things were in the air. Now, of course, we believe that some things can be spread by people sneezing on you and stuff like this. But at this time, one of the notions in medicine was sort of bad air, dangerous air. Miasma is a word that they use for this a lot. And so because of that, people would do things to keep the air around them safer. They would light fires. They would put garlic around their neck. One of my favorite ones is they would take a piece of rope, tie it around their neck, and dip the end of it in tar. So the smell of the tar. What they didn't understand was that these smells were actually keeping the mosquitoes away from them. They thought it was changing the air. Anybody else?
What happened when people died from yellow fever?
Well, there were carts that went around the city that the African Americans from the church picked up. They were taken to mass graves. It was horrible. I mean, these carts had bodies piled up on them, and people would bring their bodies out. There's terrible scenes, and Rush's writing on this, and other people's writing on this is like little kids watching their parents being taken out, not understanding that their parents were dead. Of course, they felt that these bodies could make other people sick, which I think they probably couldn't. But obviously, when someone's dead, it's better for a public health reason to bury them. So there were mass graves on the outskirts of the city. Keep in mind, the city was pretty small then. So Philadelphia was like Delaware River to 9th Street, Arch Street to Pine Street. Everything above and below that was like fields. So some of those mass graves are now where places where we live. But it was not a good job to have. And one of the reasons that the Black church community it made such a big impact on Philadelphia itself, because they took care of that for the city.
What was the death rate of the yellow fever?
Well, it is always said to be 10% of the population, because 5,000 people died. But again, my belief, and there's no way to prove this, is that a substantial enough percentage of the population left town at the very beginning. Or, keep in mind, this is Philadelphia. Even back then, people went to the beach for the summer, or they went to the country for the summer. So some people didn't come back. So it is possible that while we report the death rate as 10%, it might have been quite a bit higher.
Did the yellow fever affect young children or adults more?
I've never seen statistics on that, and I don't think we have them. I believe it affected anybody who got bitten. But obviously, older people who had pre-existing conditions were going to succumb to it more than younger people. That's always the case. Be happy you're young.
What effects did the yellow fever have on the generation after?
Oh, it was huge. I mean, first of all, after the 1793 yellow fever epidemic, every August in cities all along the eastern coast of America, people were scared to death that yellow fever was going to come back. And it did. There were yellow fever epidemics in Philadelphia, in New York, in Baltimore, in Boston, in several years during the later 1790s into the 1800s. In Philadelphia, the preventive thing that we did, you guys, I don't know if you know this, if you ever learned about this, but there used to be a creek that came off the Delaware River that went up Spruce Street, up past where Society Hill Towers are now. And that was an open creek called Dock Creek. And they used to throw horrible stuff in it. It was a tidal creek. They would throw bodies of animals that had been, used for leather. They just threw human excrement into it. And the belief was that if they filled in Dock Creek, then maybe it would be safer in the city and there'd be fewer epidemics. So the city actually did that. And that is considered the first American act of public health. Something where the government sat down and did something that they thought would make people healthier. Benjamin Rush was obviously one of the leaders of that. But it was just an ongoing fear for a really long time. And people in coastal cities always worried. I mean, people worry about the fall kind of flu season even today, obviously, right? But for them, there always was the fear, what if there's another yellow fever?
Like people are saying that the coronavirus will die out. Do you think that the yellow fever also died out?
It did die out. It died out each year and then came back. I mean, because what they knew about yellow fever, they didn't know why, because they didn't know mosquitoes were carrying it. But they knew as soon as it got cold that it ended. So yellow fever seasons end as soon as the mosquitoes that carry them die. But then it can happen again. Anybody else have a question?
What was the main reason the yellow fever started?
We really don't know the answer to that. I mean, there's been a lot of research about it, more contemporary research. There's a book that claims that the best theory is that a boat that had come from Africa through the tropics came in and brought the fever, and that it was mostly emanated from the people and the stuff that came off that boat. And so that's the best theory that we have, because we do believe that it was brought into the city and that it didn't grow in the city. So they have identified that boat, and there's actually, there's a book, kind of an academic book about it. But there's no way to be sure, but that is the theory, because it also, where that boat was docked is where people first started getting the yellow fever. At the time, people thought at that dock somebody had dumped a bunch of coffee that had spoiled during transit. So the doctors all thought that the coffee and the air coming off the coffee is what was causing the yellow fever. That's what they believed. But I think it's probably fair to assume that they were right about the location, that it was growing from that location, but they were wrong. Don't worry, spoiled coffee is not going to make you have yellow fever. But that spoiled coffee was on a dock right in front of where this boat was, because the first people who got this were all lived on Water Street. So you guys don't necessarily know this, but there used to be another street closer to the river than Front Street. It was called Water Street, and then you got right to the port. So people who lived at Water Street around Arch, that's where they first got sick. Rush thought he was okay. Rush thought he was okay actually first, because it was all the way across town. I mean, it won't hurt them.
Could the yellow fever stay on surfaces or water?
No, it was transmitted completely through your own blood being taken to somebody else by mosquitoes. It was not airborne.
Which virus is easier to just get healthier from just by your immune system naturally? Like, which one is easier to just overcome?
I think that's I think that is beyond the actual knowledge of science right now, and I think individual people have different experiences with it. So obviously anything that unfolds over a longer period of time, like coronavirus, is easier for somebody to live through than something like yellow fever or Ebola, which hits you really hard and can kill you really fast. So yellow fever is much more dangerous because you could die from it really fast.
Is there a similarity between yellow fever and coronavirus?
They're both diseases that people can get, but I think generally the answer to that's probably no. There are different kinds of illnesses. I think what's similar about them is they both suck. But I would say that that's not a medical term. That's more of a casual term. But in general, there's very little that's the same about them. Coronavirus is more like a flu. It's more like a virus that you get from sneezing and it's moving around the air. Yellow fever is transmitted blood to blood by mosquitoes. How about one more question? Somebody who hasn't asked one? Or somebody who has asked one?
How did yellow fever affect the economy?
It was actually brutal for the economy because, first of all, Philadelphia was shut down for 3 months. And even after it came back to life, people were a little afraid because, again, they didn't know if things from Philadelphia were contagious. So they would order things from New York instead of Philadelphia because they were afraid. And this other cities actually advertised against Philadelphia, saying, hey, yellow fever in Philadelphia, get your stuff from Philadelphia, from New York or Baltimore. And they tried to get boats to come to New York instead of Philadelphia. And that actually changed, ultimately, Philadelphia's status as the main port city of America. So there was a lot of competition between these cities at this time. Actually, there still is. And it definitely hurt Philadelphia financially. But Philadelphia was the U.S. capital. The U.S. Mint was there. We had all the money. So since the city was the capital, it was able to get back to work. If it had not been the capital, it would have been even worse.
Well, Stephen, I think this is great. I really appreciate your time doing this. Aren't these kids amazing?
The kids are wonderful. I would love to, if you want to learn a little bit more about this and ask some more in-depth questions, I'd be happy to do a session later. But it might be a good time for you to do a little bit of reading, a little bit more reading to find out what else you want to know about this. And if a smaller number or the same number want to do a deeper dive later in the week or early next week, I am happy as an author and as a board member of Healthy Newsworks to be available to you.
Well, we really appreciate it. Vicki, you have anything you'd like to add?
I just, want to say thank you so much for taking the time to chat with the students, answering their questions. I think I was excited when Marion brought this up because I think it's a fascinating look at, something in history as well as something today and the similarities and differences. So thank you for taking your time.
My pleasure. It's great talking to you guys. Stay safe. Stay quarantined. Tell your parents not to be silly. And take good care of them.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care.
Vicki, can we just stay on with your students just for a second?
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to hop off. Thanks.
Take care.
Thanks, Stephen. As I mentioned to you all, we do have this website now, and I'm looking for artists. I'm looking for people who have opinions. If something, if there were some interesting facts that you think you learned that you want to share with other kids through our website, send Mrs. Strickland your material and she'll pass it on. You can write a poem. You can write a poem about just how it feels to be at home right now. We're looking for anything that is really from you all. And for you artists out there, the nice thing about being on the web is you can have a lot of fun with color. No more black and white, just go for the color. And also your suggestions, of you look at the website, you look at our special coronavirus page, and you say, wow, can you be doing X or Y or Z with it? It's really a page for kids and their teachers and your families.
What is the website name?
I will post the link to the website on the classroom so that they all have access to it. And I'm going to email it to all of your parents as well, along with a copy of the release form. Some of you have signed release forms, some of you do not. In order to get your work, your art, whatever, up on that page, we do need your parents to sign a release form just so that we know that they're okay with us, giving you credit for your work. And clearly you want credit for your work.
Right. Absolutely. And any other questions? I mean, I really also see you guys giving feedback. You can give feedback to Ms. Strickland, about things that you would like to see up there, and that you think other kids are going to be interested in. So I really appreciate it. And also you can let her know I'm happy to create other opportunities for group interviews like this, Ms. Strickland. Mm-hmm. And, I'd love to hear from you guys of the kinds of people you would most like to hear from. And again, whether it's in health or the coronavirus or issues around friendships, it's a challenging time for everybody. And we want to be really responsive to you guys.
Perfect. So any of you that are going to create anything from this interview, I'm going to ask you to put it into the classroom assignment that talks about this, where you went to find the Zoom link. If you did go in, I know I emailed the link to your parents too, but it makes it easier for you to submit it inside that assignment if you can. If not, go ahead and share it with me. It's fine either way. I will also on the classroom put a link to the website that we were just referencing, as well as put up the release form. But I'll email those to your parents as well. And again, any questions, I'm on email all day. You can email me through Classroom or, just email through the school email and let me know if you do have any questions. But we'd love to see items that we can place on the website from today's interview. I think it was fascinating looking at the comparison.
Yeah. And, we already have up there 2 interviews from your group. and the picture from Pamela. And we have 2 articles that are being edited. So one from Trevor, I think it is, and one from
Beth.
Beth, yeah. And so they're just going through the editing process. It's been a little hectic around here, but now that the page is launched, things should get a little more systematic.
Great.
So great. Well, everybody have a good day. Stay safe, and hope to see you soon with another interview. Okay.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye now.